The session of the 19th Congress is hereby called to order. May I call on Senator Risa Ontiveros to lead the chamber in prayer. You may proceed, ma'am.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord of all life and power, who through the resurrection of your Son overcame sin and evil to make all things new, may we return to our work, knowing your risen presence is with us and your love is within us. Amen. Sa ngalan ng Ama, ng Anak, ng Espiritu Santo. Amen.
All call of members, the Honorable Senator Binay, Senator Cayetano Alan, Senator Cayetano Pia, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Ejercito, Senator Estrada, Senator Gatchalian, Senator Go, Senator Ontiveros, Senator Lapid, Senator Legarda, Senator Marcos, Senator Padilla, Senator Pimentel, Senator Poe, Senator Revilla, Senator Tolentino, Senator Tulfo, Senator Villanueva, Senator Villar Cynthia, Senator Villar Mark, Senator Zubiri, the Senate President.
With 21 senators present, Chair declares the presence of a quorum. Majority Floor Leader.
After conferring with the principal sponsor, Senator Sherwin Gatchalian, and in light of some developments that would necessitate his further perusal of the measure, I move that he suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2865, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Majority Floor Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2837 under Committee Report number 331. This is the bill extending the term of the Power Sector Assets and Liabilities Management Corporation. And so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, motion is approved. Senator Villar, the principal sponsor of the measure, is recognized to propound individual amendments. You may proceed, sir.
Mr. President, with the body's permission, I would like to introduce amendments to refine further the Act extending the term of the Power Sector Assets and Liabilities Management Corporation. On page 2, delete the entire sentence found on lines 1 to 3, beginning from the PSAM Corp. Until June 26 to 2026, and replace it with the following. The PSAM Corp. Shall continue to exist for a period of 5 years from the expiration of its original term on June 26, 2026. The provision shall now read as follows. The PSAM Corp. Shall continue to exist for a period of 5 years from the expiration of its original term on June 26, 2026. All assets held by it, all monies and properties belonging to it, and all its liabilities outstanding upon the expiration of its term of existence shall revert to and be assumed by the national government. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none, proposed amendment is approved.
Okay. Thank you. That is all, Mr. President.
Senator Cayetano is recognized. What is the pleasure of the Honorable Cayetano?
Yeah, sure.
Mr. President, I reserved to ask questions or to ask clarificatory questions. It's a very simple bill, so the main amendment is the period. And so for me to support this, I just have some clarificatory questions.
The lady may proceed.
Thank
With the
you.
permission of the distinguished sponsor.
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Yes,
With the permission of the sponsor, let's just put a few things on record, no, so we understand. Because normally, and there's no reason why we have to file. Sorry, may I ask that we quiet down a little bit? It's just that there's so much noise behind me.
Chair would like to instruct the Sergeant at Arms to kindly maintain order within the session hall.
Salamat. So I'll proceed. Normally when we review the lifespan of a, in this case, is it actually a, it's not a franchise, no? It's just the corporate life.
Corporate
life.
Government Corp.
This
GSCC.
is usually to extend by the normal lifespan. So it's 25 after
Yeah.
another 25. His Honor is now recommending a period of only 5 years. That is correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, and the reason for this is why when I see a number like that, the assumption is you're really just winding down. In 5 years, the purpose for this corporate existence is no longer there. So whatever needs to be wound down will be done so in that period. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Because that is the nature, the purpose of the PISAM to begin with is to dispose of these power assets of government. So there's really when that is done, it should really it should be wound down, as you said.
So, in 2003, PISAM's debt was 1.24 trillion. And do I understand correctly that now the debt is only 277.2 billion? Is that correct?
That is correct.
So more or less, we can say that they achieved their purpose. I don't know if they achieved it in a time frame that is deemed reasonable. I don't know how soon they were supposed to do that, but at least in their lifetime, they went from 1.24 to they basically disposed of about almost 1 trillion, right? Almost 1 trillion.
Yes, that is correct. That is correct.
Okay. And so what's the goal in the next 5 years? What do we expect to achieve?
Yes, they still have some remaining assets in that they wish to liquidate further, and of course they're going to retire some more of these debts because they have receivables that they have to collect as well. So that by the time that they're in a reasonable time span, they will have made significant strides to reduce the deficit that they have, and at the same time dispose of the remaining assets, which we can also provide you information of what the major assets they still have for dispose of.
Okay. It was also put on record, Mr. President, that PISAM still has 110 billion receivables. What is the status of these receivables? And is the objective for this to be collected within the 5 years? And if not, what is the backup plan?
Yes, these are from various electric cooperatives. 61%. We have a list here ranging from one of the largest ones would be 38.9, which is mainly from the receivables from Lasoreco, Magelco, and Olongapo City Cooperative, and they also have receivables also between and that are under litigation. So that's another reason why they also need an extension to resolve these legal cases that they have, and hopefully they will be able to collect on these receivables. So those are the pending in terms of the pending receivables that they have, which account for 110 billion, approximately 110 billion pesos.
So, but what will happen if these, and some of these are actual cases in court, is that correct? Okay.
Yes, that is correct. There are some cases.
We know from experience that some of these cases linger beyond 5 years. So how would this be handled if the corporate life is extended and these are not resolved within that
Well,
period?
according to the law, once these liabilities will revert back to government should they not be resolved. So I guess they will be turned over to the Solicitor General, I suppose, if in OGCC, these
So
cases would
can
be
we break that down? So all pending cases will be
turned
turned
the
over to
OGCC.
OGCC?
Should it come to the point that, but of course, the ideal scenarios for them to resolve these
Correct.
cases within the 5 years that we proposed. But
Correct.
in the event that that is not the case, then yes, this in all likelihood, of course, the executive would have a say in this. But in all likelihood, that these cases would be turned over to the OGCC for continuation.
Yeah. So this is my main problem, Mr. President. From experience, when I just review, study, read cases, a lot of issues will boil down to the juridical personality of the parties. And I want to be sure you have a legal opinion, because I don't want this to be on us, that there will be no party to any existing agreements that will now question the right of any government entity, and in this case you're saying OGCC will be the one to take over. I don't want there to be any question as to the right of these government entities to take over from PISAM. Eh, syempre, may pinaglalaban tayo, di ba? Sabihin na, oh, wala na, dismiss na yan for the non-existence of the party. Patay tayong lahat. And every 1 billion matters. In fact, I'm shocked that there is a move to put a moratorium on the sin taxes, parang di natin kailangan ng pera. Oh, so here's another case. Ayoko ng ganung situation, Mr. President. So I think it is our obligation in Congress to ask the PISAM and get a legal opinion to make sure that this legal personality of PISAM will continue, because in my mind, it's dead. After the corporate lifetime ends, it's dead. And I don't want to see these cases or even agreements that are not even cases turn into cases. They'll say na walang personality sumingil. Kasi namatay yung personality na yun eh. So, in the case of human beings, you have the heirs who have the right to take over. But not in every case, di ba? Like criminal liability is not inherited by the heirs of a person. So, I think we'll need to look at all of these cases. And I'm not delaying this in any way. No? I'm here to support you.
Yes, thank you.
I just don't want us delaying a problem and then it's gonna, we have to face it in a few years. So I think with all those pending issues, we need to see. So for example, I know that there are land leases. No? Ang landlord is PISAM. Tama? Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay.
That's correct.
So, siguro naman magbabayad yung mga lessee. Pero malay ko ba? Baka naman sabihin nila, ay, hindi na ikaw yung landlord. Sino landlord? Di namin alam. We'll file a case. Then they'll file a case and then for 10 years, hindi natin natatanggap yung lease nila.
Yes.
So we need to be very sure about that. And may I suggest that we get a very clear legal opinion on this, because that's just my concern, Mr. President.
Yes, I think we will secure a legal opinion on this, Your Honor.
I mean, I did a bit of my own research and I understand that the objective also is once the corporate life ends, the functions relating to power generation will be transferred to DOE. Is that correct?
Once yes, most likely, because they would be the agency most qualified
Yeah.
to take over these assets, should there be any remaining assets.
And then for the functions related to financial contracts, it would be the DOF, again, because they're the most qualified.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
that was, yes, we discussed that, I remember, yes.
In my mind, if you're negotiating and DOF please take over because, I don't think there's an issue there. But if there are obligations, like I said, it's a self-protective measure that I don't trust the other side. I don't know that they will recognize the legal personality of these other persons kung merong sinisingil sa kanila. So anyway, I don't think I have to belabor that point. That is my main point in this questions. Kasi then it will go into, will 2 more years help us? Will 3 more years? And no one has asked me to lobby for the extension. It's just purely from a legal perspective of how all of the whatever is due to PISAM will continue despite the juridical personality ending. That's all, Mr.
Yes,
President.
point well taken. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
With no other individual amendments,
President, I have a amendment, individual amendment.
I support my statement.
Senator Gatchalian is recognized to propose individual amendments. You may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll wait for the good sponsor to occupy the podium. Yeah.
I'll just make a manifestation, Mr. President, because I was talking to the sponsor and I said, I am not comfortable passing this without a clear answer on the assurance of the who will take over the legal personality of PISAM. His Honor says they're quite confident, but I said they can't speak for the parties that PISAM is involved with. So the sponsor said that, well, maybe what will happen is before 5 years, if there are still outstanding issues, then it will go to Congress again. I'm okay with that, if that has to come to that. But for me, the best thing to really have done is to look at all the issues and really study it. Let's do our homework properly. Kasi I don't think it's fair to pass it on to Congress. Give us a timeline, tell us it has to get done, when honestly, these are legal opinions that can be obtained. Kasi iba-iba yung situation eh, iba-iba yung kaso eh. And I was listening to the House hearings on NGCP, and legal issues are legal issues. That's why they're lawyers. That's why we have courts. So this will come up, and I don't like it. I am not comfortable. I feel like it's a shortcut to just pass it on to us and say, bahala na. Hindi ako komportable po, Mr. President. But I'm not gonna stand here and object to its passing. I'm just putting on record my concern that if you do the proper homework, check every case and see what the legal situations are, then we're better equipped with what we have to deal with in the future. Thank you.
Noted, and with due thanks to Senator Cayetano. Senator Gatchalian is recognized. You may proceed, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one amendment, Mr. President, and I already gave this to the good sponsor for his pre-clearance, Mr. President. On page 2, line 6, after the phrase national government, insert a new proviso which reads, provided, comma, further, comma, the PSAM Corp, provided, comma, further, comma, that PSAM Corp shall be prohibited from collecting or charging consumers for stranded costs and stranded debts during its extended corporate life, except as otherwise approved by the Energy Regulatory Commission, ERC, open close parentheses, prior to the date of the passage of this act. So move, Mr. President.
Yes, Your Honor, we accept subject to stand.
That's it, Mr. President. Thank you.
There is a proposal. Is there any objection? Duly accepted by the sponsor. Any objection? There being none, the proposed amendment, subject to style, is approved. What is the pleasure of the Honorable Villanueva?
Yes, Mr. President. Mr. President, I remember during the period of interpellations, we were asked if we can just forgo with our interpellations and perhaps raise some issues during the time of the period of amendments. May I just raise some, just two important issues, Mr. President?
The chair confirms that, given that we simplified the bill
Yes,
to a large
Mr.
extent. The gentleman may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. At the onset, may I just put into the records that I fully support and understand where the good senator from the city of Taguig and Patero, Senator Pia Cayetano, raised a while ago. And Mr. President, I just have some clarificatory questions with regard to the performance in terms of sale and privatization of assets, Mr. President. Mr. President, PSAM has disposed of 1,784 real estate lots covering 1,071.04 hectares, Mr. President. I'd like to make sure that my numbers are correct, Mr. President. And may we just know, Mr. President, how many lots remain to be privatized, Mr. President, distinguished colleague?
1,764 disposed. And disposed 1,600.
Yes, just to, as of December 31 of 2023, the real estate lots, there are 1,764 lots disposed, equivalent to 1,067.5 hectares.
And how many lots remain to be privatized, Mr. President?
I can give the exact number, but it's approximately 800 lots.
I'm sorry,
It's approximately 800 lots.
800 lots.
We can furnish you with the exact
Yeah.
number shortly.
Thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleague. I remember, Mr. President, during the Senate committee hearing, PSAM mentioned about some 5,141 estates. They are still managing, if I'm correct, Mr. President. Could we clarify, Mr. President, if these 5,141 estates comprise the total remaining real estate assets for privatization, Mr. President?
It cannot be sold because of President. That's why we're starting to here. It's not included, sir. This is what can be of the remaining some of these property requires.
The real estate that you mentioned is covered. They're not able to privatize. They were not included in the list for privatization because they fall under certain presidential proclamations and and some of them are untitled, so they're not open to privatization.
So, Mr. President, are there any specific assets that do not generate revenue or are costly to maintain? I just wanted to find out, Mr. President, like how does PSAM plan to accelerate the disposal of these remaining real estate assets? And we're only talking about extending it for another 5 years, right, Mr. President?
That's part of the expertise.
Yes. There are a lot of the assets held by the ones that are non-generating. Of course, there are assets that are power generation, so they generate income for PISAM. But there are, like as you mentioned, there are real estate assets that they're in the process, and some are under litigation, some are untitled, and some are fall under presidential proclamation. So those are the assets that are not income generating for the PISAM, and there are efforts to have them titled so that they can be utilized. But the ones that we mentioned earlier, these are the assets that they have that can be readily liquidated.
That's perhaps, Mr. President, the last point that I'd like to raise in this particular issue is, do we have an estimate, Mr. President, as to how long it would take to dispose all remaining real assets, real estate lots, or as to how many will remain unsold until 2031? Because, Mr. President, based on PISAM's published information, 647.2 hectares across 858 lots of real estate assets remain, Mr. President.
So how long will you think? In the extended period. Based on my conversations and based with my conversations with PISAM, they do have a real estate plan for the liquidation of those assets, and but they said most likely it would take more than 2 years to do so. That's why we have this 5 years. They feel it's a reasonable time to liquidate the rest of the real estate assets that they.
So it is reasonable enough to
Reasonable.
have the 5-year extension.
Yes, it's
to dispose
it's
all
a
of
reasonable period of time, we believe, based
Thank-
on our conversations.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will trust the sponsor more than the original information that where he is getting this information. But Mr. President, I wanted to believe that it is possible. But of course, they've been there for 25 years, and parang ang hirap po paniwalaan na kaya nang mangyari. But anyway, Mr. President, let me go to another point. As I promised, I will be very short with this queries. Some of my questions were asked already by Senator Cayetano. Mr. President, the principal purpose of PISAM is to manage the orderly sale, disposition, and privatization of National Power Corporation owned generation assets, real estate, and other disposable assets. Mr. President, how much is PISAM spending on the storage, maintenance, taxes, and safekeeping of these assets, Mr. President?
Are you sa pagkakalit?
Because my next question, Mr. President, is how much is it losing due to the depreciation of these assets while they remain unsold? So that's where I'm coming from, Mr. President. So how much are they spending, and how much is it losing due to depreciation of these assets while they remain unsold, Mr. President? Mr. President, I'm asking this question because IPIRA, our IPIRA law, does not contain any provision that exempts PISAM as an entity from taxation, unlike the National Power Corporation, whose charter provides that it is exempted from direct and indirect taxes, Mr. President.
Mr. President, the annual OPEX operating expenditures of the PISAM comes out to approximately 500 billion pesos. So more or less 500 million operational expenses. So, that more or less that we can say that is the amount that is needed in order to that the government is spending in order to liquidate these assets, which is also why it's necessary to have this extension, but make an extension that is of a reasonable time, because of course there is a cost to this liquidation, and if you extend it too long, these costs mount. So I think 5 years would be a reasonable target. At the same time, it gives them enough time that they can get maximum value for the assets that they are disposing.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. Perhaps the last issue that I'd like to raise, Mr. President, is on the financial obligations and liabilities of PISAM. Mr. President, PISAM projects that PISAM projects, Mr. President, that its financial position may only become positive by 2040. If I recall, Mr. President, there was a statement during the hearing, and it will become debt-free by 2056, assuming ideal conditions will be met, Mr. President. In other words, Mr. President, what is PISAM's endgame? With the proposed 5-year extension, what would be PISAM's roadmap or timeline to achieve its mandate of full privatization, liquidate all debts, and ensure a seamless dissolution without disrupting the energy market, Mr. President?
Discussion. The first one, tapos the collection of the 110 billion pesos. We also have the view of privatized Spain.
Yes. So, right now, there are approximately 447 billion pesos worth of assets which they are expecting to liquidate. This is part of the plan. Now, these remaining assets include the Agus Pulang.
I'm sorry, how much is it again, Mr. President?
447 billion.
447 billion.
Yes.
So these are all maturing financial obligations that need to be liquidated.
No, these are assets that they're
Old assets,
disposing
okay.
in order to meet their
Okay.
financial obligations.
Yeah. And it needs to collect probably about 100 billion, if I'm correct, from
Yes.
problematic accounts.
Well, no, this aside from others, the receivables are 110 billion from
Okay.
delinquent accounts, power receivables from power cooperatives, and also from Meralco. So that comes out to 110. They also have 118 billion pesos worth of power generating assets that they feel that they can receive 118 billion pesos, and other privatization proceeds for 51, and they have an allocation from the law, the MKA, which is 168 billion. So that comes to 447 billion pesos.
447
Yes.
billion. But PISAM has about, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if my figures are correct, 282.6 billion left to pay as of May 2020.
277.
277.
Yes.
So it's less than 282. So it has 277 billion left to pay. What is the current amount of its total liabilities, Mr. President?
277 is the remaining liabilities.
That's the remaining.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Perhaps the last point that I'd like to point out, Mr. President, is the roadmap or the timeline to achieve its mandate of full privatization, and it will be accomplished in the next 5 years. Is that
Well,
correct, Your Honor?
in a sense, by giving them an extension for 5 years, we are giving them that timeline in order to liquidate the remaining assets, which is which we feel is realistic. But of course, we also have to be aggressive because again,
And practical as well, Your Honor?
practical. But
Thank
that,
you.
it doesn't preclude anyone from requesting for an extension. They can always. But that being said, we want to set a. I think it was agreed upon that we should set a target that is achievable and aggressive at the same time.
Thank you, Mr. President. Perhaps may I just ask for parang yung timeline lang, Mr. President,
Yes,
breakdown how we're going to do it so I can fully support the measure. I'd like to thank the gentleman from Las Piñas for answering very patiently my this representation's questions. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you, distinguished colleague.
Thank you, Senator Villanueva. Majority Floor Leader. Close second.
Mr. President, with no other individual amendment, I move to close the period of individual amendment.
Any objection? Hearing none. Period for amendments now closed.
Mr. President, I move to approve on second reading Senate Bill number 2837. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? There being none. Motion is approved. Majority Floor Leader.
President, 1 minute suspension, Mr. President. I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2895 under Committee Report number 424. This is the bill on the amendments to the Comprehensive Firearms and Ammunition Regulation Act. I so move, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the aforementioned bill is now in order.
Mr. President, having closed the period of interpellation, I move that to open the period of individual amendments and recognize the sponsor, main sponsor, Senator Juan Miguel Zubiri as well as
Senator Bato is recognized.
Ronald Bato de la Rosa to propose individual
The
amendments.
sponsor of the measure and to propose amendments, the Honorable Zubiri. The gentlemen have the floor.
Thank you very much, Your Honor, Mr. President. Maraming salamat po. If the good gentleman from my region of Mindanao will accept a few perfecting amendments, maganda na po yung kanyang panukala at committee report. Dadagdagan pa natin ng konting bonus kung papayag po siya.
Mr. President, can I have 1 minute suspension?
Oh, yes, yes.
It's okay.
Session suspended.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I have some, my amendment is still on page 2, so, hindi pa pala tayo. If I may, Mr. President, is there, maybe you'd like to ask if there are amendments on page 1?
Yes, Mr. President, on page 1, I think Senator Risa Hontiveros has some amendments.
Yeah, meron page 2.
Senator Rutevez recognized.
Permit to ready.
Salamat po, Mr. President. Good sponsor. On page 1, line 7, I propose to delete the phrase duly authorized representative and replace with the phrase the chief of the Firearms and Explosives Office as may be authorized from time to time. Explaining further, Mr. President, that this contains the clarification made by the sponsor himself yesterday that only the Chief of the Firearms and Explosives Office may be delegated the authority to issue permits to carry firearms outside of residence. So I so move.
What does the sponsor say?
I accept, Mr. President.
Any objection to the proposed amendment as accepted by the sponsor? There being none, proposed amendment is approved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good sponsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, page 2, if I may.
No other amendments on page 1.
Senator Risa's page 2.
Okay.
Nauna siya, Mr. President.
No, what line, Senator
I'm
Risa?
on, section 3, so I don't know if you're ahead of me.
What line, Senator Zubiri?
I'm on line 27 po.
What line, Senator?
Mine's, Mr. President, good gentlemen from Bukidnon, are on section 2, lines 5 to 18.
The lady may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. So, good sponsor, on page 2, I propose to delete lines 5 to 18. This is section 2 of the bill, which relaxes the restrictions on the persons allowed to own and possess firearms. And because it is my view that the current protections of the law be kept and not modified, I so move, Mr. President.
What does the sponsor say?
I can hardly accept that amendment, Mr. President, because I have cited my case yesterday that if you have a pending case, you can no longer avail of this permit to carry firearms outside of residence.
Yes, sir.
So we cited the equal protection of law that unless you are convicted of a crime, you are presumed innocent, Mr. President.
Yeah, just read the things.
If I may proceed, good sponsor.
The lady may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I submit, but not without reiterating for the record that the reason I interpolated about this point with the good sponsor and still attempted to propose it as an amendment is because of my very strong belief that, which was not disputed by the good sponsor, but my very strong stand that ownership and possession of firearms is a privilege and not a right, and as a privilege must be more strictly rather than less strictly regulated. For the record, Mr. President, and salamat muli sa good sponsor.
Mr. President, I just would like to, I have a counter offer, kung pwede sana. I'm willing to accept that amendment, but provided only those charged with the crimes punishable by more than 20 years and above. Because, like in my case, arbitrary detention, punishable by maximum of 20 years. So, I think, kawawa naman yung mga police o mga law enforcers na nakasuhan ng arbitrary detention, tapos sila mismo, they are the ones implementing the law, porque may kaso sila,
hindi sila maka-avail ng permit to carry firearms outside of residence. So, yun lang po yung aking counter-offer, Mr. President.
Also,
Baka pwede yung
I'm sorry.
the-
Ladies first. Yeah, it's related lang, Mr. President, because if I may,
The Honorable Zubiri is recognized for his interjection.
permission of Senator Pia. Senator Pia and Risa, and of course Senator Pia, she was also raised hand. Yeah, there are a lot of people are actually, they have a lot of cases, but many of them are harassment cases. So we just want to avoid also, people file cases of harassment, just to harass a particular individual. And that individual is a high-risk individual, like a politician, or he's involved in the banking operations, or he's involved in finances, he's a lawyer. I know a lot of lawyers are pending criminal cases filed by losing opposite sides. No? So they'll not be able to avail of the law if we put a very strict disqualification if there's a pending case. So yun lang I'd like to point out also. Tama naman si Senator Bato, if it is a case maybe concerning murder, kidnapping,
heinous crimes, Mr. President.
heinous crimes,
I can go with that.
trafficking of men and women and children, and things like that. Pwede po yan. Pero yung simple, baka simple fraud or whatever na pending pa naman, maraming nagpapile. Maraming mga congressmen pinailan. I know a case of a congressman whose father filed a case against him because he supposedly had taken over the business of the father, but apparently it is a family spat, and the charges have all been dropped. But at that point in time, the person will lose his opportunity to be able to defend himself with a firearm. So, yun lamang po, if there's a compromise, baka we can limit it to heinous crime.
Heinous crimes, Mr. President.
Oo.
I am okay with heinous crimes.
Can I make my interjection with the permission of
Senator Cayetano, with the permission of Senators Ontiveros and Zubiri, may proceed with their interjection.
Thank you. No, I just like to add to this discussion, no, because I know this is a very important provision, and we're trying to balance the right of innocent persons who want to avail of this privilege. I agree with Senator Risa that it is a privilege. So I'd like to ask His Honor's thoughts on the sponsor's thoughts on persons who have been charged with violent crimes. Like, it may not be heinous, but what if it is an act of violence, domestic violence? And in many cases, violence occur in their own home by their own partner. So the incident may not include the use of a firearm, pero may violence. Like, nananakit na siya. Antayin pa ba natin na baril na yung itutok sa kanya? That's coming from a female perspective. I totally understand. I hate it when people are being blackmailed or they are going to be taken advantage of and be prevented from legally carrying arms. Pero valid din naman yung concerns ng mga kababaihan at pamilya na there is somebody in the home that is licensed to carry firearms, tapos meron na siyang pinakitang violent action. Paano kaya natin yun mabibigyan ng protection?
Your Honor, the case being cited by Senator Pia Cayetano can very well be addressed by the other requirements in the availing of the permit to carry firearms outside of residence. Like for example, pag may history siya ng violence, kung magpaparecord sa police station yung
Yes.
kanyang asawa, so meron na siyang blatter doon sa estasyon.
Okay, yes.
So one of the requirements for a PTC4 is police clearance.
Okay.
So pag meron siyang record doon, hindi siya makakuha siya ng police clearance, pero may note doon na may blatter siya dito
And
of
then what happens?
violence.
And then what happens is that
Hindi siya ma-approve.
Okay.
Hindi siya mabigyan ng
because of
PTC4
that.
because of that.
I'm comfortable with that, Mr. President.
Yes,
Kasi
because,
yun yung protection ng pamilya na hindi basta-basta Alam niyo naman, you know what, that story I'm concerned about, di ba, na nagyayabang pa na may baril ako, ganon. So, okay, I'm okay with that. I wanna get the opinion of my female colleague if that sounds, it sounds reasonable naman na.
It sounds
napocover yun.
more than reasonable, Mr. President.
May the chair-
I thank my kabaro for...
May the chair suggest, having heard the opinions of our colleagues, can we just place in the section, Your Honor, Senator Bato, that the pendency of a criminal case will not automatically disqualify an applicant? unless disqualified either by order of the court
Yes.
or by relevant regulations that may be issued to address the changing needs of the times. So, ang sinasabi natin sa provision, kasi nakalagay dito, shall not be disqualified. Shall not, anyone with a pending case shall not be automatically disqualified
I accept, Mr. President.
unless so ordered by a court of competent jurisdiction or by regulations.
And regulation means,
Sa IRR, pag may policy yung presidente, yung chief PNP na, alam mo, dumadami yung mga gantong krimen, pagbawal, mag-stricto tayo ng ganito. Yung sinasabi niyo pong pag may blotter, regulation lang po yun, di ba? Na hindi sa i-issuean ng permit to carry outside of residence.
Correct.
That's only a regulation, that's not in the law. So
Yes,
if the law, if the regulations so limited, pero hindi siya automatic disqualification,
I agree, Mr. President.
would that be acceptable?
Because I'll take it further, Mr. President, no. Ang madalas naming kaso in our show is yung nakainom, tapos yung mga tambay dyan na nanggugulo lang talaga sa neighborhood. Like, whether may baril pa yan, or balisong, or nothing. Ang yabang-yabang makaasta doon, di ba? Parang mananaki talaga. So again, that could be covered by regulation. Kasi mabablatter din siya eh.
Yes,
Yung
aside from
sinasabi niyo, mabablatter din yun eh, dahil nanggugulo ka sa community.
Aside from the blatter, police blatter or police clearance system, Your Honor, Mr. President, meron pa yung kaukulang background investigation. Bago ka bibigyan ng threat assessment. Kasi one of the requirements for permit to carry firearms outside of residence is for you to have a threat assessment coming from the PNP. Ang maggawa nito is yung intelligence group ng PNP, the Directorate for Intelligence, at kasama dyan sa kanilang gagawing threat assessment is yung background investigation sa iyo. Kung ikaw ay lasinggero, ikaw ay kilala na bully sa komunidad, lalabas yan sa report doon na galing sa intelligence, sa threat assessment, na hinihingi mo, so hindi ka mabibigyan ngayon ng threat assessment dahil may pagkaabusado ka.
Okay. Okay.
So may the chair take the liberty of proposing subject to style?
I accept, Mr. President.
The provision from line 12 after the word provided until the word jurisdiction on line 17 shall now be read as follows after deleting the same. Provided that an applicant who has a pending criminal case shall not be automatically disqualified unless ordered disqualified by a court of competent jurisdiction or prohibited by relevant laws and or regulations. Subject to cite.
I accept, Mr. President.
Pero, Mr. President, if I may,
Please.
if usually, for example, there is a crime that is committed, I noticed that the PNP, through the Chief of Police or the Philippine National Police Chief, issues an order to revoke all its firearms, his or her firearms, especially when they're on the run. There's a warrant of arrest that's issued
Yes.
against a certain individual and nagtatago sila. Siguro isama natin that the authority, which is the police chief, can also revoke their permit if there's a pending.
Insert yun.
Yeah.
It will be covered by relevant rules and regulations that if he is wanted by the law, if he is running from the law,
Yes.
then it can be revoked. But by regulation, because we cannot
Okay.
possibly provide for every possible scenario and situation that may arise in this provision.
Okay.
Okay.
Because, Mr. President, for example, for example, our friends in the media, maraming kaso ng mga libel yan. Just because may libel cases yan, not allowed to own firearm, kawawa din naman sila. They have to protect themselves. So this amendment of Senator Bato is actually a good amendment, so at least they'll be able to, it's not automatically disqualified if they have a case.
Yes,
Correct.
that will be the effect of that.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, if I may also just make of record,
Please.
una po salamat sa good sponsor sa partially pagbubukas muli dun sa punto na in-interpolate ko noon dito naman sa period of amendment. Nung sinabi po nila na baka unless charged with crimes punishable by more than 20 years. I appreciate po yung effort ng good sponsor, balikan yung interpellation namin at magluwag ng kaunti. Again, I reiterate my appreciation to my fellow woman senator, Senator Pia, for bringing up that aspect of violence against women as it may be impacted by our bill. And last but not the least, salamat tabi din sa presiding officer, Senate President, for providing what may be the broadest possible retention of some of the current protections under the law by his formulation accepted by the good sponsor in relation to actions of the court, laws and regulations. So since it's no longer necessary for me to accept the amendment to my amendment of the good sponsor, then I just would like to put on record my thanks.
Thank you, Senator Pia. Senator Risa, allow the chair to dispose first of the amendment. So there is a proposed amendment to the amendment duly accepted by the author, the sponsor. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the same is hereby approved. Senator Cayetano.
Mr. President.
Mr. President, I may have a proposed amendment, but it's still a clarificatory question first. Still on section 2, but on the first part, I note that it refers to a crime that is punishable with a penalty of more than 2 years, no? So I direct my question to the lawyers in the Senate Hall and also our secretariat who help us with the language. Ano ba yung rule natin? Are we trying to, this is a special law, so we go by years. We will not follow the usual standard in the revised penal code where we define arresto mayor, arresto menor, prison mayor. Ano bang rule natin? Sana may consistency tayo para standardize ang lawmaking natin. I don't really care. It can still be within that time frame, but for form.
Given the existence of special laws which provide for penalties not following those provided for in the revised penal code, usually
They
what I've
usually
seen
go by years,
is they go
no?
by years and they just go to the corresponding penalty imposed by the court, which specifies the years of arresto mayor or prison correccional in the decision convicting an accused.
Okay.
Diba range of 6 to
Yeah.
12 years.
Yeah.
The years are specified. But the more relevant question would be why 2 years? Because you either go by probationable or non-probationable. Probationable meaning lighter crimes or offenses. Non-probationable meaning more serious crimes and offenses.
That's my second question. Kasi pinag-isipan naman yata nung mga predecessor natin ng mahaba yung below 6 months, di ba? Tapos 6 months to 6 years, tapos 6 years to 12 years, 12 years to 20 years. So sana may relevance itong 2 years. Ano ba yung mga crimes na eksakto sa 2 years? Dapat alam natin yun.
May I throw the question at Senator Zubiri and De La Rosa, who are the
Proponents.
movers of this bill. Again, 6 years, below 6 years is probationable. If you're a first-time offender, not a recidivist, not a habitual delinquent, you can apply for probation. Ibig sabihin, hindi naman serious offense to. Hindi mo kailangan makulong, probation ka. Above 6 years, you're not eligible for probation anymore. Now, do you want that? That can be a possible threshold,
Okay sa akin yun, Mr. President.
which is more lenient
Yes.
than
Okay
2
po sa
years.
akin. Okay po sa akin, Mr. President. I don't know the
Oh,
co-sponsor.
if that is the intention, to make it easier.
Yes, Mr. President. Because
Ano ba yun na intention?
this 2 years this 2 years is stated in the existing law, the present law. That we are amending. This is not part
Not
of
an
the
amendment.
I don't
Dati
think
na ito.
So we can make that amendment, Mr. President. I think Senator Pia is just
Yeah, I'm just pointing it out so that we consciously are amending what we want to amend. And if this is not a proposed amendment, we are consciously not touching it. Hindi yung parang di lang natin ginagalaw na di natin napag-isipan. Kasi if you ask me, I'll just go by the basis of the Senate President na generally, yun yung mga 6 years and below. Hindi ko kasi
minor
I don't
crime.
know off the top of my head kung ano yung pasok sa 2 years, ano yung 3, ano yung 4. Parang 6 years and below yung general ano niyan eh. Unless hihimayin talaga natin isa-isa. So if we go by the wisdom of the previous Congress that set it at 2 years, follow lang tayo. That's why I tossed it to the lawyers, no, to get the insight.
According to my expert here, Senator.
Mr. President,
Mr. President, if we can contribute to the discussion,
6 months to 6 years.
we will assume that we are recognizing. Mr. President, ito yung requirements ata na may declaration si applicant eh. That sasabihin ni applicant that I have not been convicted of a crime punishable by more than 2 years. So, dapat stricto tayo. This is a convict that we are allowing to possess firearms, Mr.
Right.
President. So, kaya let us not make it 6 years, masyado naman. So 2 years, okay na po yun. Okay. Lesson mo, dapat nga, lesson pa. Kung tutusin. If you're a convict, you are not allowed to own firearms. Dapat. Pero ito, parang may concession na 2 years. So that's the current state of the law, Mr. President. So I will discourage being more lenient, Mr. President, to the convict. Thank you.
We have the intention of amending this particular provision, Mr. President. Mr. President, can we continue with the page 2?
Yes, please proceed.
Senator Subiri has some amendments on page 2.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, if I may, on page 2, section 3, on line 29, after the word business, Mr. President, delete the line, provided that such permit shall be valid for 2 years from the date of the approval of the application unless sooner revoked or suspended, and will be replaced with, provided that such permit shall be valid for 2 years, 5 years, 2, 5, or 10 years, as the case may be, depending on the term of the corresponding LTOP, unless sooner revoked or suspended. So, ang punto dyan, Mr. President, is that the PNP chief can issue a permit to carry. Right now, by law, it's only 2 years. But he can make it 2 years, he can make it 5 years, he can make it 10 years. The reason being, for example, you're a retired judge. You're 65 or 70 years old. I think the retired judge is 70 years old. He may apply for a 10-year permit to carry. Para naman hindi naman sa every 2 years magbabalik sa chief of police kasi anyway, he's qualified being a retired judge and maybe his life will continuously be in danger, specify he handles high-profile cases. Yun lamang po, Mr. President. Maybe, if I ask for 1 minute suspension, Mr. President, I just want to clarify something.
Session suspended.
Yung corresponding LTOP that